ByteDance's CEO and founder, stepping down as CEO amid Chinese regulations. We have Didi last week being pulled from the App Store in an unprecedented penalty. All the educational companies this week were told that they cannot operate as for-profit companies. SoftBank is clearing a bunch of its Uber position to cover their losses in Didi. There is the story of Larry Chen, who is a Chinese education entrepreneur. He was worth $15 billion in January. Tencent lost $100 billion in market cap.
I think they're just smart, and they were like, we're not going to allow this to happen. So they don't have to deal with Section 230 or any law like that. I think it was just a realization that we want them to understand who is boss, right? And so there was a wave of resignations. There was now all of this market cap upheaval. And this is now where we get to sort of like the appetizer. And I think in the appetizer, what they're basically saying is, we will control how money is made and who makes money. So look, for example, when you invest in China, right, or if you set up a fund, there are two pools of capital, right? There's the local renminbi denominated investment vehicles, and then there's the US dollar denominated investment vehicles. And they do that to segregate where the capital comes from. So it's not too difficult for the Chinese government to basically say, you know what, I'm going to actually make a constraint on dollar inflows so that, the renminbi denominated investment funds that are from Chinese investors into Chinese companies needs to be above a certain percentage, call it 2/3, right? Or call it 80%. They can make all these decisions because these are all just rules that are completely under their control. So I think that people who don't think this is going to happen are probably not looking at the setup. The setup seems to be directing itself towards that outcome. I think what's happening in the short term is that the same thing that we are talking about in the United States, that Sachs is, very eloquently, basically, I think led most everybody in just really framing for a lot of people, is this idea that, we have privatized free speech and we have put the distribution of information into the hands of 3 or 4 founder CEO oligarchs. That's also true in China. And when you look under the hood of the major internet companies, there's 4 or 5 guys that are in charge. And so I think that in the United States, politicians feel increasingly uneasy with those folks having power because it's applied indiscriminately. Trump gets banned, Trump may not get banned, this person gets distribution, this article is considered misinformation, that article is considered disinformation, this article is suppressed. It's a dangerous place to be. And in China, they were just like, enough's enough. So I think the short term, as it relates to the internet companies, was basically a realization that we are not going to allow any more devolution of power from the Chinese Communist Party to and into the hands of these internet entrepreneurs, right? So if you're a CEO and they don't like you, you're going to resign, right? If you're a company and they're worried about your propensity to be a little too frisky on your own, they'll rein you in. They'll either use cybersecurity law or something else. But the point is that I think that we shouldn't take this as free market regulators having their way. This isn't Lina Khan implementing, some laws. This is a top-down decision to nationalize large parts of the economy. And I know that for some people that may seem unfathomable, but if I'm a betting man, which I am, that's what I would bet on, that this is the beginning of an attempt to pull these companies in. The Chinese government owns the data of Chinese companies. So at the end of the day, the Chinese government also owns the users and it also owns the revenues. It just hasn't told you yet. The long term in China is complicated. It is an enormous demographic time bomb. We've talked about this before. By the end of 2100, China's population will shrink from 1.1, 1.2 billion people down to about 700 million people. Right, so they had very progressive, quote unquote, under their framework, laws of one-child policy to basically make it economically viable in the 60s and 70s. There was such a number of people. Those people were able to get great jobs in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And now they've realized, oh wow, we made a huge miscalculation because now there is just not enough people. And so China's going to shrink. And I think that, honestly, I think Xi Jinping probably thinks the simplest way to solve this is to basically nationalize a lot of the economy over time. And so if I was a betting man, which I am general, but I'm not in China because I just don't understand the market. I think that what we're starting to see is the beginning of nationalizations. And I think it's going to start in technology universe because those are the critical assets that the Chinese need to own for the future. In this thing, what's happening right now is China very firmly telling everybody, we are firmly in control. There is no private market and there is no capital market without our approval. And that's a really big statement. And in fact, it was such a big statement that I think the Chinese security authorities then had like a conference call at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all these folks were invited. And the vice chairman, basically, his quote was something to the effect of, we promise that any more changes will at least let you know. Not, hey, there's nothing to see here, or there's nothing more to come. It's just more that as we decide new rules, we'll make sure that we give you guys enough warning. So it's very much firmly saying, we know exactly how money is made. We will decide who makes money in what way, and we're going to make sure that all of this wealth creation happens under terms that we define. And I think that the setup for the long term. All the Chinese GPs are fine. All the Chinese companies are fine. I think David's right. It's just a discount factor. I do think it affects global dollar flows, and I think it's hard for a Western capital pool to allocate money into China without doing a little bit more work and applying a higher discount rate. I think these things will operate more efficiently than that because you have a distributed shareholder base. So, China can't force a shareholder of Didi to sell the shares because it's listed in an American stock exchange. But if Didi does go private, the way that the news reports are saying, somebody's going to have to backstop that capital. I suspect it'll be a Chinese organization. I think that is an obvious signal that we're moving into sort of a nationalization of critical resources. And China has determined that internet resources are critical. And I think that that's right. If I was in their shoes, that's exactly what I would do as well. Guess what? Because if you want a shred of fucking lithium, if you want a battery, if you want nickel, if you want anything to happen, you need to work with China. They are incredibly smart and thoughtful. They have been strategic while we've been running around, complaining, crying, talking about the kindergarten soccer game. They were doing the hard work. They were doing it for decades. And until we find solutions that can work around them, we need to work with them. This is creating a mono economy, right? It's like, it's going to blur the lines between public and private ownership. And it's going to basically make it one huge pot from which the Chinese government can take and put it back into as it deems fit for the broader success of China as a whole.